Hello and welcome to Decoding Life, a podcast aimed to help teens find their way through life when they have to make life-altering decisions. My name is Aishani and I'm the host of this podcast, and today we have Miss Katee, an art teacher, looking stunning as usual. So, Miss Katee, can you please introduce yourself to the audience and who you are, your background?
Yeah, sure. So this is my second year here at Raha. As you mentioned, I am an MYP and DP visual arts teacher. This is my 8th year, though, in Abu Dhabi. I used to work at the American International School of Abu Dhabi, AZA, where I worked as an art teacher there as well, but also as a middle school counselor in the past. So I am from Canada originally, and I love the sunshine, which is why I haven't gone back to Canada. It's too cold.
It's really nice meeting you. I had you as a teacher last year, which is how I found out you have like a background in psychology.
Yeah.
So I was hoping to talk to you more about like one of the problems that I'm pretty sure the majority of teens face, with basically how we're going through a lot of hormonal changes and changes in our environment and with ourselves as well. So it feels like we often feel like nothing's in our control, and then we kind of compare ourselves to others and we have this negative perception of ourselves. So more about like we get a low self-esteem and we have negative self-image issues and all the sort of things that we think is normal. But I want to talk to you about like how we can recognize different traits in our thinking patterns, and also maybe like addressing some of these issues and trying to find a way to view yourself in a positive way, even though you do have flaws, maybe accepting those flaws. So maybe to begin with, do you think it's something that we should address seriously, as in getting like help for it? Or do you think that having a low self-esteem and a negative body issue should be something that it's like a phase and it'll just pass and we should treat it like that?
Well, you said a lot of great things there in terms of thinking about how we challenge our thoughts. I think it's never a bad idea to reach out for help. If you are struggling with something and you're not sure how to go about it, community is always the number one place to go to, and that you're not alone. I do think that components of that is common. Like a lot of people necessarily go through that, but it's not necessarily normal to be suffering through it and really, really struggling. So reaching out to a trusted adult, which is true, but also your friendship group, and knowing that you're not alone in that process, and sharing resources and supports is really important. So please never ever suffer alone. And that you're never alone. You're always, somebody is there to support you in the community, including myself. You could always come to me for anything. Always a safe space to listen and to support and to keep you safe as well. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that was actually really nice of you. And I think a lot of people also feel comfortable speaking to someone like you. And but like when we try to figure out the root of the problem, so I think a lot of people, pretty much everyone knows that low self-esteem and these negative body image issues, they come from comparing ourselves to others. But do you think there's like another cause that we can maybe address when looking at that?
Like when you first came to me and you mentioned that you wanted to do this podcast, I thought, like, what a gem of a topic, because it's something I don't think we talk enough about, but it's something that I think is on a lot of people's minds. And again, is very common, like to go through those thoughts and those processes, especially when you have so many things changing. Like, and I'm right there in the get-go, even though I'm in my 30s. I am pregnant right now, and everything about my body is changing. So I'm definitely in that same place, and hormones changing up and down. So I've also been doing a lot of reflection and thinking about that, and how much it's a journey, and that it never actually stops. Not that sounds really terrifying, but like, it's true, life doesn't get easier, you just get better at it in terms of how we process and go through it. And again, I love that you brought up about that component of thoughts, and really asking yourself, like, what is a thought? And that thoughts aren't facts. And especially when it comes to our body image and stuff, like catching ourselves when we say like, oh, I feel fat, therefore I am fat, that kind of way of thinking. So making sure you can catch those moments when you say that and challenge them. And that just because you feel it in that moment doesn't mean that it's necessarily true about you, which is easier said than done.
Yeah, I think that we can speak for a lot of people when we say that it's easier said than done. And
for me, one of the strategies And again, it's a journey, and it's a journey that I've been on for myself personally. But I'd love to share some of the kind of tips or things that I know I put in for myself. One big one is gratitude journaling. Those that have had me in the past know I'd like to do that with the gratitude Post-its and stuff. But I actually do activities for myself. I journal every single day. And one of the things I journal about is gratitude for my body, and actually forcing myself to think about the things that are good about it. And this also sounds extra cringy for some, but I actually look at myself in the mirror, which again is hard sometimes, but look at myself in the mirror and look myself in the eye, and actually will say those things to myself, like, oh, I love my skin. I love the way my body looks. I love how strong I am. I love it when I lift weights because I feel strong when I do that. And just the fact of actually looking myself in the eye and saying it, I believe it so much more. Because your friends could say it to you, your parents could say it to you, but until you can say it to yourself, you're not going to believe it. So it's kind of that phrase, fake it till you make it. So again, it sounds cringy, but like, and again, this last couple of months have been difficult for me, and I've kind of had to revisit those thoughts for myself, but I've started doing that again, where I actually will say that to myself in the mirror to convince myself and remind myself of those things. So just those daily habits and practices can help to start to change that way of thinking that we have, especially if you have a lot of automatic negative thoughts about your body that you're starting to notice are popping up. Building in those kind of day-to-day practices, and it doesn't have to take long. Like, I do that every morning, and it takes me like 2 minutes to do that. And I notice the difference it makes, because I catch myself in my thoughts, and I start saying those things to myself more. Like when I for example, I got really sick a couple of days ago, and usually I'd be like, oh, why am I sick? This is horrible, blah, 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 blah. And I'd be really negative. Instead, my first thought was, like, I'm so grateful for like my body and that it can heal itself and that it's working so hard right now. So those little changes can make a big difference.
Basically, like spotting out negative thoughts and turning it into a positive thought.
Yeah. Although I do want to emphasize that it's okay to have negative thoughts, because again, thoughts are just thoughts. That's all they are. It's just you processing information that's coming to you and not getting kind of caught up in that thought, in the practice of letting it go and not kind of getting caught up in a story with it. So again, it's okay to have whatever thoughts you do. It's just not getting caught up in the thought and not always believing the thought that it's actually fact. Yeah.
I think another way I see it is when we have negative thoughts, especially about like the way we look, it's often because we notice these flaws in ourselves. Even if they aren't necessarily true, in some sense, it's something you notice about yourself that you don't like. So do you agree with the fact that we should accept those thoughts, but also kind of change ourselves? So if I think that I have gained a little weight, should I try, like, do you think it's a good idea for me to like just fix those flaws?
Yeah.
And maybe that could work?
Yeah, what a great question. I do not have the magical answer to this, but like I totally ponder and think about this stuff all the time as well. So I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase it. So I do believe that I think about this with like non-striving, like that constant need to want to self-improve ourselves. Like our culture is really obsessed with that. This need, and being, that's a big part I think of sometimes IB. It's that constant strive. And you're right, it's very comparison driven, the culture that we have as well. So it's so hard not to get caught up in that. And I do think that idea of self-improvement is a good thing, right? Like when we think about wanting to get better at something, like, you know, that's what drives us to do different things. So part of that is, I guess, within reason of what you can control and what you value, and really figuring out what are your values. So when you're saying about, like, for example, related to gaining weight or your body image, what is the underlying value that you live by? And for me, one of my big values is to do things that are good for my body and for my mind. And I think of myself as a healthy person. Like I'll often say that. That's one of the things, again, I'll journal about is saying that I'm a healthy person. So when I think about the choices I make and decisions, am I doing things that are good for my body, basically? And for me, that might drive me with my choices. Those that have had me know that I always have like a box of like vegetables and fruits and loads of stuff on my desk. So I'm always snacking on foods and stuff. But I always think about that, like, is this going to fuel me? Is this going to help my body feel good? So a lot of the choices and environment I create for myself are reflected of that value that I have. And then same thing for exercise. You know, I go to the gym 5 days a week. Not for necessarily the appearance, but I know that it makes me feel good and it makes me feel healthy. And I go back to the whole thing about my body being strong as more of kind of my mantra or thought to it. So part of it is whether or not you feel like you're in alignment. And sometimes too, if you don't feel good about your body, or you know what I mean, there's something that thought is kind of triggering, that's again goes back to that kind of journaling and self-reflection of like, well, what is this really telling me? You know, and I said don't read into the thought, but you can also kind of wonder what's the core thing that's driving it. And often that comes from not living with alignment of our values. There's something there. And if that thought does keep coming back, you can challenge it and say like, no, like I do things. I do make choices that align to the values that I live by, which again, in this case, hopefully is just being healthy and what a healthy body actually looks like. Yeah.
So it's more about like figuring out what you actually want from yourself and not what you should be wanting, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's a lot of work. It's hard to figure out what is it that I actually value and not what your parents have told you to value, what society has told you to value, what the media has told you to value. Really sitting there and figuring out like what are the ways I want to live my life. And part of that is asking like, what does a good person look like to me? What kind of person do I want to be? Like, it sounds very morbid, but it's like on your deathbed. Like, what do you want people to say about you when you're at your funeral or something? But, you know, those tend to be where you can kind of get at those core values. And then kind of taking a step back and deciding what do I control that relates to that value and what don't I control about the situation with it. So, again, that feeling of I feel fat or I feel like I'm gaining weight or I don't like my appearance right now. What do I control about that situation that aligns to that value of being healthy? Yeah.
So I think, and journaling about like what makes you feel grateful, that kind of also brings you back to what do I actually want from whatever I value?
Yeah.
And like setting that apart from what you're trying to achieve and if that's not aligning with what your values are. So it's kind of keeping you back to that point where you know what you really want.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And knowing what, I think too, like we always talk about happiness, like this drive, like you should always want to be happy. One of my pet peeves is that our values of Raha, one of them states is, I think it was happiness. But that bothered me because you can't, like, it's not about being happy. It's about feeling well. It's about being balanced. And again, I'll go back to the whole thing. It's okay to have negative thoughts as well. Like that's a part of living. Like if we all felt and saw things in a perfect positive way, we wouldn't make the world a better place. We wouldn't see flaws or issues, problems that we wanted to develop or get better at. So again, it's about how to live that kind of balanced life, how to live that kind of equilibrium, we call it. Yeah.
I think you touched on that earlier when you were like, when you're saying it's a continuous journey and it's not about your life getting better, but you getting better at life, basically.
Yeah, it's the skills you
And,
work with, yeah.
So even though there will be ups and downs, like it's necessary to recognize whatever flaws you have.
Yeah.
And then realizing, is this something that I actually value in myself and I want to improve? And if not, then that essentially doesn't matter.
Yeah. And go with that too, like one thing I don't think we do a very good job with is also providing what those skills look like. So like, how do you live a well life? Like, what does it mean to feel well, to feel healthy? What components, what pillars make that up? And it's no surprise, like that the number one thing is sleep. Like getting good quality sleep. Like I couldn't rant enough about this, but getting good quality sleep every night is the best way to feel well and to feel balanced. And of course with that is daily exercise, is eating nutritious-based food, not counting calories ever. Please never count the calories. It's just whether or not you're putting food into your body that is nutritious and learning that, like what foods are nutritious. How is it going to make you feel and noticing how you feel after you eat certain stuff. community. It's the connection with your friends and with your parents and stuff like that.
And I think the other thing that it takes is a lot of patience, because I'm trying to go through this and like trying to improve myself. But I see what a lot of people try to do is they're like, oh, you can lose this much weight or you can get this done in 2 weeks. But then what I see from experience is like it takes years and years of improvement. And that takes a lot of patience, because sometimes I don't see results in whatever I'm doing. I don't see an outcome from that. And then I get frustrated and I realize that it takes patience. So, and I think a lot of what you're saying, as far as I can tell, is kind of from experience. So do you have an experience like this where you were like trying to get somewhere, but it took a lot of work and you need a lot of patience? And
for sure. There's a famous test or study that they did. It was called the marshmallow test, and they gave these marshmallows to little kids, and they told them if they could wait like 5, 10, 20 minutes, they would give them a second marshmallow, and they could eat both of them. And then they would follow these kids throughout their whole life, and they called this study delay of gratification. So it was their ability to sit there and not, even though you really wanted that marshmallow and to eat it, to be able to sit there and not do it. So to delay that instant want or need, knowing that they would get the benefit later on. And of course, loads of kids couldn't do it. Loads of kids would like take it and they'd lick it and then put it back, or some of them instantly just ate it. Maybe they lasted 2 minutes before they ate it. But there were some kids who could last the whole length of time. And the kids that could do that, delay that gratification, later in life, were more successful in school, had more successful relationships, reported feeling happier, had better overall health. So part of that, I think, comes from that skill of being able to delay that gratification, that practice, and that it's okay to also be uncomfortable. Like, we're going back to negative emotions and feelings, but to sit there with discomfort and be able to tolerate it is actually a super useful human skill and trait. And I'm not saying this because teachers can have boring classes, but sometimes that is a part of it. Like, being able to sit through a really boring class you hate is actually a really useful skill. And being able to tolerate it. Obviously, you don't want to make yourself suffer, but it does help build that resiliency, that you can be patient. And then you can take the time to wait for those developments. Because you're right, though, it's 1% increases that make the result and difference of stuff.
It's just about knowing that the longer you do it, like, because you know what you're doing is correct, and the longer you do it, the more results you're going to see, even though you don't see it immediately.
And the first time you have an experience where you achieve that, you can always go back to that experience and remind yourself of, like, okay, I know I can do it because I've seen it happen before. So it's getting over that first time that you've ever done that, where you worked really, really hard for a long time and you saw the result of it. And that builds that momentum that you can keep doing it over and over again. So really putting yourself in those difficult situations and overcoming it is the best way you're going to keep growing and getting stronger and better at that, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah. And you've actually said a lot of things that I'm really in agreement with, and I really like that. I think so far my favorite thing that you said is it's when you go through life, it's not that life gets better, it's that you get better at life.
Yeah.
I love that quote so much. And I think it actually speaks to a lot of people, because we think that we're, as teens, I think, we think that we're in a phase where we're getting used to things and we're sorting stuff out, and then after we pass through this phase, it's just going to be normal. But it's not the case. It's just about building those skills, as you've also said, and recognizing what you actually want from yourself.
Yeah, and that going through hard stuff is a part of that, and overcoming the hard stuff. Yeah, for sure. And I don't think as adults we do a good enough job at that. I think we often aren't empathetic enough that when you're going through difficult stuff, it does feel like the end of the world for you because you haven't gone through it yet. May it be like a huge test or a huge fallout with a boyfriend or girlfriend or a friend or whatever it is. And I sometimes think adults can kind of brush it off because we've already gone through a lot of stuff. So we can see it on the other side and be like, oh, that's not a big deal. There's nothing worse than feeling dismissed by somebody, like by a parent or, you know, an adult that you trust, where they kind of say that to you, right? So I think we need to do a better job at acknowledging that, like, when you're going through something really hard, like, it's real for you. Like, it is the end of the world, you know? And yes, in like 10 years, you'll look back at that and be like, that was nothing. Why did I freak out? But at the time, like, it was legitimate. So yeah, I think we should do a better job at that, for sure.
Yeah. And I think if there's one piece of advice or one thing the audience could take away from this podcast, what do you think it should be?
Ooh, good question. Actually, the thing that's going to my mind, just going back to what you're talking about with the weight stuff, because I love, I do love healthy living. I love researching loads of well-being based science, and I've done loads of nutrition classes and stuff to educate myself because I'm so interested in it. But going back with the people telling you about like, oh, you can lose 10 pounds, or you know, I have this ideal goal weight and stuff like that emerges. But I would argue that your ideal body weight is based off of the healthy diet and exercise you live and the good quality sleep that you get. Which, by the way, good quality sleep actually makes you lose weight.
Oh, really?
It does, yes. It can also, like, in terms of cravings and stuff like that. So, but so living a healthy, balanced lifestyle, your body will naturally go to the weight it's supposed to be. There is no artificial weight that you should be fitting in. So when we say like you should weigh, you know, 110 pounds, you should weigh 115 pounds or 120 pounds or whatever, you know, like the scientific standard weight for your age and your BMI and all that stuff, although BMI is in itself not really valued anymore. But by living healthily, you don't even need a scale. Like, you don't need to know that. Like, I don't even own a scale. I got rid of my scale about 5 years ago. The only time I know is when I go to the hospital and they forced me to be weighed. But like, I don't need to know. I don't know what that weight size is. I just know that I feel good in my body. And part of that, again, is that learning to listen to your body too. And you're kind of saying too, like when you feel really low and you feel kind of blah and you're having those thoughts come up, I have to ask myself, am I doing things that are reflecting my values? Like, oh, have I been working out? Have I been eating well? And then maybe I have been, maybe I haven't been, but it gets that kind of check for me to make sure that, again, I'm living in line with my values. So I go back to that. It's not about counting calories. It's not about getting to this ideal body weight size. It's living a healthy lifestyle and knowing that you're doing choices that reflect that, for sure.
That speaks to me so much, and I think a lot of people can also get so much out of this, because for the longest time, and I don't know how long it's been, like years, I've been trying to get to this ideal body weight or this ideal
where does that come from,
body
right? Like
weight,
everyone
yeah.
has this like magical number we come up with. And it's like, where was it that we read an Instagram post or TikTok or whatever, where was it or heard somebody say that we got that number in mind? But so many people have that, like, yeah.
Now that I think about it, like, how do I know that's the ideal body weight? Like, I thought that was, like, it's up to you to decide where you want to be in terms of your weight and how you look. And I don't think, now that I've spoken to you, I don't think anyone should be able to tell you differently.
Yeah, your body's going to tell you, because my ideal body weight is going to be different than your ideal body weight, depending on what my needs are and where my body's at in that moment. So, for sure. Yeah.
And I actually love talking to you. I cannot explain how much I was looking forward to this podcast for a long time.
We have been trying to do this for a
while.
We've been
doing it for
canceling it over and over again. So
I think it was like since
it's been a long time coming.
I think since March, maybe we've been trying to do it. So it's been a lot of like patience and waiting to. I was looking forward to this podcast so much, but it was so much worth the wait. Like, I cannot explain how much I'm grateful for this podcast itself. Like,
yeah, I'm so happy you guys are doing this. Again, fantastic topic. Wait, one last thing, and then I swear I'm done. But one other, going back to the thing of one last thing I would say, or tip or comment, is self-forgiveness. Like, that's another huge one as well that comes with our diet and our food and our body image, is the shame. We carry so much shame with us. So making sure that you are actively saying to yourself what you forgive yourself for that day. And again, nobody else is going to be able to tell it to you, that you would believe it until you say it to yourself. And that's a practice I do as well. And again, it's cringy, but even looking myself in the mirror, in the bathroom by myself, nobody knows what I'm doing, and just saying to myself, like, I forgive myself for yelling at that kid today. I forgive myself for eating that cheesecake, or whatever it is, but just making sure that you're providing that space for yourself, and that can be very powerful to do.
Yeah. think the same, because like if you don't forgive yourself, and I think so many people have also experienced this, but you go through this thing where you did something wrong and then you just live with it for the rest of your life, and there's like guilt. And I think what I experience at least is that every time I do something else that's wrong, they come back as flashbacks, as these are other things that I've did wrong, and
it's like that loop
yeah.
becomes, for sure.
So I think self-forgiveness is also something extremely important for people to practice. And there's actually been a lot from this podcast for people to take away. And
yeah, good. I'm so happy.
So, we went through like the basically the negative emotions and turning it into a positive thought, and the gratitude, the self-forgiveness, building skills, and all these different things. But again, as you said, it's easier said than done. So
yeah, for sure.
It's just this constant journey of self-improvement, I guess.
Yeah. Also, it's okay to eat cheesecake. I didn't mean that like that. I forgive myself for feeling bad about eating the cheesecake. There you go.
Yeah. So also, like, the way you phrase it also matters. Yeah.
Exactly. There you go. Great. Thank you for having me. Wonderful.
This was amazing. I think for the audience, if you want to have Miss Katee again, if you want us to talk about something in specific, then please let us know in the comments. Or if there's anyone else you'd like to see, then also just let us know in the comments. And
awesome.
Great. Can't wait if we do a second part with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.